Right guys, so a hugely requested video on how to edit like Andrew Kearns. And before I get into it, I just want to say, as always, links to the creator's content will be in the description, so make sure you go follow him on Instagram and on YouTube. Right, so it's pretty easy to see that he is always tweaking his style, and his style ranges to quite a few things. So sometimes he's going for a very overexposed image, sometimes a very well exposed image, and it's very interesting how often he changes it up. There's quite a few black and white images, but what is consistent about his image is he has a decent amount of fade, he has a very soft looking image, he has a lot of red in the shadows that helps make a warm looking image, doesn't use vignettes, and overall has a reasonably moody image. And as for shooting style, he is very much a lifestyle photographer. So he's not always posing as subjects. It just looks like he's just capturing things on his adventures. And I think it's very cool. And by the looks, he's generally using a wide angle lens of about 24 millimeters. So let's jump into Lightroom and see what we can do. Right, so in Lightroom now, and as you can see here as our reference photo, we have a nice warm looking image. And over here we have our image, and what we're really going to focus on in this image is the greens and getting the contrast right. And yeah, let's crack on into it. So we're going to warm it up, as he has a very warm image. I'm going to bring this down a little, maybe a bit more. 5 is good, and we'll take down the exposure a little. Highlights up. He quite often has very bright highlights. Bring up the shadows. Take down the whites a little, and really bringing down the blacks. As for clarity, he has a pretty soft looking image, so we'll just bring it down a little. Vibrance down. And saturation down. Now, tone curve. Right, so pretty standard S curve. Dropping those whites a little. Bit of fade. You can spend a lot of time tweaking curves. But that's how we will have it for now. And before we do colors, we'll do split toning. So he has a lot of red in the shadows. So we're going to bring it to 15. We'll see how 15 looks. Let's bring it up. And now we'll see how it looks when we cool off those shadows with some blue in the highlights. So that looks good, and now we'll come up and do our colors. So HSL, starting with the hue, let's bring that up a bit. Oranges can come up. Yellow can come down. Green, might keep it there. Aqua, not gonna matter too much in this image. Blue, might bring that down a tad. Purple, magenta, not very noticeable in this image. Right, moving on to saturation. Let's bring it down. Down. Bring the yellows up. So his greens have a very almost orangey, warm, quite a deep look over here. So let's bring those greens down. Bring the blues down a little. And we'll bring magenta down. And luminance. Red can come down. Orange a little. Bring those yellows up. Actually, we will leave oranges there. Bring yellow right up. And leave greens there. We'll bring down blues just a little. Now we're getting pretty similar colors. We want to take sharpening down as his images are very soft, and he very often uses grain, so we're going to put some grain in there. Right, so I think we have pretty similar greens and contrast and a pretty similar looking image. And if we want to add some haze to this mountain, maybe some more exposure, as he very often exposes his highlights a lot. Right, so that's how the image is looking. Let's go back to reference. So we're not going to get it exactly the same. We've got the greens pretty close, but they can't be exactly the same, as he took this much more in a sunset, so he's got a much softer and deeper look to his greens. But we're going to save this as a LUT. At Andrew Kearns. So everything except exposure and filters and create. Right, now let's see how it works on other images. So I've got this image here. We will be working on this image. Now, a lot of people didn't come here to shoot flowers like Andrew Kearns, but I think this is a good image that we can see how our previous LUT we made, how the contrast and the reds and the shadows and the saturation, and we'll see how it works on this image. So let's find our LUT. Here it is, and let's apply the white balance, and there. So in one click we get something pretty similar with minimal tweaking. And what he has done, he's really brought out that red flower. So what we can do is maybe add another. If you wanted to be more accurate, you'd use the brush. Place that on there, maybe up the exposure a little. Bring up the dehaze a little. Clarity maybe. Bring the blacks down. And maybe the whites up. And that's going to create a little bit of contrast and pop to those flowers. And I think we have a pretty similar looking image with a very minimal amount of clicks. The warm red in the shadows, the desaturated greens. Our greens are looking good. So we're gonna move on to another image. So we've got a portrait image here, and we're gonna try to work with this one. So let's apply our LUT, and it's not looking too bad. Bring up the exposure, and it's not quite there. We'll have to make some more adjustments to this one this time. So let's start by contrast a little. Bring up the highlights. Down those shadows. Bring the blacks down a little. They can stay the same, and we've got much too much red in this one, so we've got to come down to split toning and drop this to about 8. Now that's looking alright. I think we've got a pretty similar skin tone. A bit more contrast would be nice. That probably looks a little better, but I know if we bring up the contrast, it's going to look very strong on other images, and I like to make my LUTs that they can work on almost any image, and then just a little bit of tweaking can get you there. So I'm going to leave it about 8, and then when we add radial filters, that's going to bring us the contrast. It's going to add more in. So add some extra exposure. Maybe a tiny bit of haze. And Andrew has his own photo editing tutorials, and he uses a lot of these. So obviously this is not the best reference image, not the best image to work with, but I think from what we can work with, we've got a pretty similar contrast and colors. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks. and he quite often overexposes, especially in his portraits. He really blows out the background when he does portraits. And we're going to leave that as that. And this is a much more subtle LUT, as our other one was too strong. So I'm going to save this one as well. And create. So let's work with some other images. Let's see how it works now on this landscape here. And we've got a good reference image over here. So his trees are a bit more warmer, a bit more contrasty, and the sky pretty bright, not overexposed, but very bright. And let's apply our second. See what our first one looks a little too strong, very red. Maybe save this one for more moody situations. And our second one is a lot more subtle, gives us the deeper yet warmer greens, brings out these colors here, and gives us a bit of extra exposure in the highlights and those red warm shadows. And you might want to bring up the blacks a little, and maybe even lower the red in the shadows a little more, and you get something pretty good. Right, so let's move on to another one. Let's see. So we've got this awesome image, and let's see how we go with this. So there's our first LUT, a bit too intense at the moment, and second, looking pretty good. Maybe bring up the shadows and a little bit of those blacks. And bring down those highlights a little. And he's obviously got very, very bright highlights in here. He might have used a filter to brighten that up. And bring down those highlights. And then what you can do is come in with a brush and just brighten up. You sort of want to go off what is already bright and just give it a little extra. And then you adjust what you have. So we're adding exposure to what we just brushed, and you get a bit more depth, dynamic lighting. And I think that's looking pretty good. You might want to add a little bit of warmth actually to the actual image. I think we're about right. So, and this image, his one is looking, it's got a lot of yellow in her face. Our one doesn't at the moment. So let's add some warmth to our one. And you get those nice yellow highlights, especially on her face. Very warm looking image. And if it's too warm, maybe you want to add a bit more blue into the highlights as well. or perhaps take out some more red, and you get something pretty similar. Nice yellow warm highlights, pretty warm shadows, and he is using quite a bit of grain. So let's see how ours looks with a bit more grain. Looks pretty good. So let's see. He sometimes uses very, very warm landscapes. Maybe just shoots at the perfect time, but let's see if we can make something like this. So really warm sunset going on. Our one, soft looking sunset. But if we come over here, add our first one, looking pretty similar. And then up our warmth, maybe up the contrast. Didn't mean to do that. Contrast some more. And as you can see, very bright highlights. Our light has really whitened out that background, but it hasn't gone completely white. That's very important, as there's still you can still see the edge of the photo. Maybe bring up the saturation a little, drop the blacks, drop that saturation back down, and you get a pretty, just a very warm looking image. So that's looking pretty good. Let's see how it works on this landscape here. So this was the first one we did, a bit strong. Second one, if we bring up exposure a little, on off, gives a quick little vintagey look maybe. Again, it's warm, it's got warm shadows, it's got well exposed highlights, and it looks good with minimal tweaking. And let's see what else it can look good on. So what he also does, so in this one, he's got a very let's put it over here. He's got a very bright, almost overexposed image going on, and let's see how our one does at a beach setting. So let's apply a more subtle one and a bit more exposure. And since we've really brought up our highlights and shadows, dropped our whites a bit, dropped our blacks, we're able to really get a washed out, bright image while keeping some contrast, and it gives those very bright beach vibes. So that, again, it's minimal editing, and we get those bright highlights that he quite often uses, like this. And then what you'd maybe want to do is grab a radial filter, drag it over, add a bit of exposure, maybe some haze, maybe some contrast in there. Whenever you add exposure to an area of a photo, you want to add back in contrast. And what happens, you get a nice beach vibe, very bright beach vibe. I mean, I should be spending longer on editing these, but just for examples. And I think they've looked pretty good so far. So here's another just photo example. First LUT, a bit strong, very, very warm, and our more subtle one with a decent amount of contrast, decent fade, and it looks very good. And here's, we'll try this image. Let's apply, try both of them. Oh, yeah. Let's bring down, we'll just bring down the highlights. Bring up the shadow some more. Maybe bring up the whites. Very warm looking. Let's try a second one, a bit more subtle. Bring down our whites, bring up our shadows. And yeah, try it on this photo. So once we apply our LUT, straight away, more in the highlights, warm in the shadows, and it looks great. And then grab a radial filter, add some exposure, add some haze, and you get a nice warm looking image. And it's great for those beach vibes. And going back to our very first, I think we've done a really good job of creating a warm, highly exposed, warm in the shadows, warm in the highlights, has fade, has some deep blacks, and has bright highlights. So I think we've done really good. And I mean, those LUTs were working on many photos. So thanks for watching. Make sure you leave a like, leave a comment, and make sure you go follow Andrew Kearns' Instagram and YouTube. He has a great YouTube channel, and all that will be in the description, so make sure you go check it out. Leave a comment on who else or what you think of this, and make sure you leave a like as well. And thanks for watching, so catch you later.